Hey class, we're going to introduce a new way of making sculpture and a new project using found objects. There's an artist named Fred Wilson. He uses objects and their meaning in his work. He doesn't actually necessarily assemble them as sculptures, but he says about objects that are in the world already. I would like to think that objects have memories and that we have memories about certain objects. He says, a lot of what I do is eliciting memory from an object. So it's something to think about with this idea of found objects. This the origin of this type of work comes from Picasso and also Duchamp. We'll look at both their works. Um, as often in art, Picasso was really an originator. And from 1912, he began to incorporate newspapers and things like matchboxes into his collages. And he would make these cubist constructions from scavenged materials as well, which is what this is. It has like fringe from some type of piece of furniture or a sofa. So these were like relief constructions. They kind of extended traditional still life painting into three-dimensional space. And this composition is closely related to his paintings of that period. It kind of appears to depict a tabletop or a small sideboard with a knife, a beer glass, two slices of sausage, and a slice of cheese or pate. That's the kind of ideas going on here. The feelings of that type of thing. He's playing with that purposeful, interesting thing. Um, this work emphasizes that the painting is an object in and of itself, though. It's not like just a painting, right? He's painting on the objects, but it's not a painting. This is real upholstery fringe to represent the table. So it's a new way of working, a new freedom in his choice of materials. Well, there's another guy named Duchamp. He's really famous for, he's a Dada artist, really famous for doing this and a lot of other things. He made up the term ready-made, and this piece called The Fountain was not accepted as art at the time. 1917, he signed it R. Mutt right here, a fake name. And there's a story that goes along with it that he was entering it into an art competition, and all you had to do was pay a fee and you could enter your work. So he signed it as this guy R. Mutt, even though that's not his name. He's like a persona. And he turned it in. So it's really an upturned urinal, and it really shocked the art world and raised questions about what is art and the role of the artist. Now this is like a classic piece of art that's definitely accepted. But at the time, it was people were pretty pissed off about it, and he people took this idea further from here. I don't think that Picasso is necessarily trying to be so shocking as much as investigate new materials, whereas Dada is about sometimes about shocking and turning things on their head or making you think about them in a different way. So we have kind of different uses of the same type of ideas here, found objects. Later, we're going to see some artists who take objects and transform them or coat them or cover them with paint as a way of using them as formal things as well, so somewhat hiding them like Louise Nevelson. But let's talk a bit about, you've seen this slide before maybe in my presentation early on about what is sculpture, and we talked about expressive and formal language and the character of things. So assemblage is another word that people use for this. So you could say found object, uh, ready-made here, assemblage. They're all commonly used terms. It's basically here taking disparate elements, often everyday type of elements, scavenged or bought by the artist. And this artist, Jessica Stockholder, has a lot of different elements here. Carpet, lumber, fake fur, plastic, ceramic knickknacks, so a lot of things. She said that I work on top of or in relationship to the stuff I collect. I don't see a dichotomy between formalism and something else. So formalism is art is the actual form. Things like color, scale, shape. These are formal terminologies we would use, right? And so she's saying formalism and also other types of ideas that go together, whereas some people just like to be focused on only form or only idea. She says form and formal relationships are important because they mean something. The meaning grows out of our experience as physical, mortal beings of a particular scale in relationship to a world as we find it and make it. I don't buy that formalism is meaningless. So she has this idea about the expressive qualities of things, that we have a lived experience with them and they have content because of that. She could be credited with the popularization of the practice of pairing brightly colored consumer products with painted interventions. This is something she's well known for, so she's got this interesting idea about consumerism. For this project, you're going to also work, if you see the assignment sheet, found object project objective. Create a sculpture that has an autobiographical narrative from manufactured, found, discarded, and accumulated objects. So what do we mean by autobiographical? Think of this idea of telling one's story. In literature, the autobiography is somebody telling their own story in writing. But for our purposes, we're going to think about it as telling of your life. It could be part of your story or something relating to it. It does not have to be overtly personal in like exposing your dirty laundry to the world, so to speak, but something relating to you in some way, of your life, of your experience. That's the main thing we want to get across with that. There's an artist here who does something really interesting with found objects. This is actually, the only thing found here is actually a bone, and then some of these things are found because they're types of trim and things you could buy ahead of time, and he constructed this. But this is a really interesting project because it shows you, he basically had this crazy hoax prank type of thing. I worked with, in grad school, one of my teachers had actually worked with him, and I have sort of met him, not really. I've seen him at this guy, Jeffrey Valance, at different projects and emailed back and forth with him. He's an interesting guy. He has a kind of comedy to his stuff, and he had a kind of prank to the notion of these pet cemeteries, and also he's kind of dealing with death and morality, but basically it's from a project called Blinky the Friendly Hen, where he certifies the death of the hen with legal documents and then buries it in a pet cemetery, and then later on he exhumes it, so digs up the bones, and then makes this idea of a reliquary. So reliquaries are often associated with saints, objects, and the bones. In this case, so it's a chicken. So it's conceptual art from the 1970s. And he has other pieces like this. They often have on reliquaries a plaque, like he just did Orange Crush. In this piece, he did the video art to go along with it. The other pieces, not so much, but he carried on with reliquaries. There's a sort of sincere humor and farce in his idea because he's actually really sincere about some of these ideas when you hear him talk about it. In some ways, this one becomes autobiographical because his ideas about like life and death in some way. And then this one is even more connected in a way because this piece of glass from the Orange Crush bottle is supposedly from his life, and he, maybe it is, maybe it's faux, like a fake version, but he told stories behind his objects. So there's a sort of idea of this is an important moment or object from his life that he's designating in the same way, and this is from something he did, designating it like a reliquary, which reliquaries are a thing that actually exists in the world of form, that exists in the world, in a number of Catholic churches and different places like that. So he's playing with this idea, but he's also has sincerity about examining life and death and his own life in some way, and what life is like. So it's an interesting way. This is a guy, Rauschenberg, who uses a lot of different type of materials. You can see down there the list: oil, paper, fabric, reproductions, metal, wood, rubber, shoe, tennis ball, canvas. And he kind of has an idea of no special material. Any material, natural and man-made, can be used, and I think that's true of sculpture. But he was quoted as saying that he wanted to work in the gap between art and life. He questioned the distinction between art objects and everyday objects. So this is reminiscent of the issues raised by the fountain sculpture, and he's very interested in this idea. He calls these combines. So we have another word that you might see in art history, combine. And with his work, we definitely get a lot of formalism, but we get a lot of the idea of kind of an anti-art aesthetic. He's pretty aggressive in his challenging of what art materials are and what the aesthetic should be. And that's a huge part of his work, as well as the formal ideas in it and then the content coming out of those type of things. So that's he's definitely a really influential artist, and he's done a lot of work that's been pretty in the late 1950s, 1960s. That was pretty caused quite a stir and made people think about this type of stuff. So going on to another artist, I kind of already mentioned about how she coats her objects all in one color, monochromatic, one color. Um, and all of her sculptures, pretty much most of them, are found wooden pieces of old furniture and things like that. So Louise Nevelson, she lived from 1899 until 1988. She was an American sculptor known for her monumental and then monochromatic wooden pieces. Some of them went on the wall and some of them were outdoor sculptures. This one's called Sky Cathedral 1958. So she really, really was very, very influential with this work. And you can see how the way in which she made these are all different pieces from the Sky Cathedral series. The way she painted it all one color really makes it about the form and makes us think about what it is in a different way than if we had the patina, the actual feeling of the age. Let me see back here. The particularity of these pieces. We see where they're maybe coming from and their use. She was keeping more of the actual shapes and the forms of pieces rather than the patina or the look or the color of them. You can see old pieces of furniture, crates, wood, but they become something different. So she wanted to incorporate things already made and used or appropriated. That's found objects. So they could be made and used or appropriated. She made parts of this. Like she had to probably make some of the boxes to hold it in, or maybe the base plinth down here, the armature, but overall it's a lot of it. The majority of it is things that were already there. So she used to walk the streets and find bits of furniture and inspiration for them because for several years she was impoverished, and her son and her would walk through the streets gathering wood to burn in their fireplace to keep them warm. And then the pieces she found served as a starting point for this art that made her famous, basically. And you can see that it's interesting that she calls them cathedrals, because we think about a cathedral as a place of worship, housing people, all different types of ideas. So talking about the sky and cathedrals, that adds a lot to it, but then it kind of makes you question, well, how is this a cathedral? How is this a place of, presence or something? What is it that we're dealing with? And those are the kind of questions you end up. She began creating white and gold pieces and enclosing her small sculptures in boxes, like I said later. And they have a very different feeling, but here in this picture you can see more of the feeling of the pieces of old furniture, knobs and things, the forms, and the parts of old bed rails and things like that. So you can kind of see that they're related to the home and the body and the scale, where it makes us think about what's around us and decoration and all different types of things like that. Pretty interesting work. Gordon, we're going to look at, this is another one that was in the round more because it was all a big cube that it was put on top of. We're going to look at some work by Gordon Matta Clark. This is called Bingo from 1974. This is interesting because he was trained as an architect And he used his training to dismantle buildings instead of making them. So these are pieces of a derelict house from Niagara Falls, New York, and he transformed them into works of art by taking them out of their location and making them into these strips. There are, I believe, there were 3 sections of one of these houses that he took out. So this would be a case of using the gallery like a site exchange from a site out in the world, this particular building, and then the site in the gallery, which is an important idea in sculpture, sites, where the things are, the placeness of it. So he took this from abandoned homes. He saw an opportunity, what he called basically anti-architecture, anti-architecture. So a combination of anarchy and architecture is the word he used. He liked to draw attention to buildings that were overlooked, architectural sites, and things that were abandoned. So with a small team of workers, he cut the house's facades into 9 rectangles. They kind of resemble a bingo card game. And then this is why the work is titled that. And he left part of the middle of the house and deposited 5 of these into a nearby sculpture park, okay, where he hoped they would be reabsorbed into the earth. So he put 5 of them outside, and then kept 3 which are in the MoMA's collection, and 1 was kept in the actual original. So there, and when you see all 3, they're displayed aligned on the gallery floor so that the viewers can walk through them and around them and see the segments, the interior and the exterior. And so he's inserting pieces of the outside world into an art museum to draw attention to the difficult state of that town and our relationship to the world and people who live in areas that are, having difficulty in housing and things like that. So pretty interesting work. You can see the old, where the stairs were and all different things. It really is like a kind of uncanny experience to see these type of things. This is another work that has to do with a place and related to a place. David Ireland, that's the sculptor's name. This is called Brooms. He liked to make people pay attention to individual things and the way they were. He has a long connection. He believes a lot in the work of Marcel Duchamp. In an oral history, we could say, he said Marcel Duchamp was a patriarch who set art free by saying everything we want to be art can be art. So this is kind of his idea. He's playing with the everyday, the materials, and he had an ongoing relationship artistically with a particular house in San Francisco called 500 Cap Street, where he basically was working on it and using it as an art space for a long time. The context, he was making sculpture from objects inside the house, turning and changing the house and making it into an environment that was a whole art installation sculpture. You can actually go and visit it if you want when it's open. You have to call and see if it's open, but it's called 500 Cap Street. So he worked there from 1975 to 2005 and also lived there. So he saw his art as embracing ideas of sculpture, but also performance and installation art. And he was more like not just interested in like a ready-made like Duchamp's, you just pull it out, slap it down, it's ready-made, but more interested in the idea of changing it, working with his hands and kind of changing the ready-made, so taking it and then turning it and changing it in some way so that it wasn't just as it was exactly found, which is what you're going to be doing for this project. These are interesting pieces by Joseph Cornell. He worked with a lot of different types of things. This one includes wood, paper, glass, sand, doll arm, coins, different type of pieces of bone, sequin, beads, and all these different little areas here, and bottles. The title of this here, L'Egypte de Madame Cléo de Merjou, I can't say this French very well, Elementary History Natural. This is actually a real woman it's translated the Egypt of Miss Cléo de Merode, Elementary Course of Natural History. She was a real historical figure from the Belle Epoque in Paris. She became really famous. She was an illegitimate daughter of a baroness, and she became a renowned glamour figure. Originally, she was a dancer. So she was eventually on postcards and things, and her hairstyle became really popular throughout Europe. And she was even depicted in different types of sculptures. She was the sculpture of her is in the Museum d'Orsay, and then Toulouse-Lautrec painted her portrait even. So she's kind of a muse type of figure that he dedicated this to. And this guy's famous for working in these boxes. He was an American artist who lived from 1903 to 1972. He also did some filmmaking, and he was really an important person in this idea of assemblage. So I said different terms people have used: found object, assemblage. He was influenced by the avant-garde filmmakers and the surrealists. So he got into this idea of using cast-off discarded materials, and you can see he used a lot of little maps and things in his work. You can see all these little boxes here have parts of maps, and there's a way in which these are supposed to be opened and shut, and they become this like really interesting world, talking about like the way in which the world exists and how things interact with each other through compartments and things like that. I think he's a good person to look at because his work uses found objects, but then he adjusts them and changes them. So he's assembling them using assemblage to kind of change them and recontextualize them, but keep some of their original meaning as well. Here we have like all these tiny little pieces of cork and pictures of bird and pieces of wood. So it's really like cast off things and small things and working with it. But he uses a lot of these types of an idea of a box and housing things to kind of organize his ideas. So that's a bit of a different way of going about it. There's another guy here, Kurt Schwitzer. He, in a way, this is kind of more like a relief sculpture. He's kind of dealing with more of a picture. So that would be like relief sculpture is more like a picture. But he likes to combine, he uses this idea, Merz, it's a German word, not giving it the proper accent, but he uses this idea to talk about assembling and assembling pieces that are from the everyday life. So this is in 1919, so we're back to an early period of time where he started doing this. This is from 1921, but he started doing it in 1919. So we're back to the early Duchamp Dada period here, one of the earlier people of it. He took this idea and had this idea of like a theory around using everyday materials to assemble them, and he even did other type of sculptures and installations and staged sound poetry. So he was really a multidisciplinary artist, and he worked with a lot of different groups. So I want to say real quick, maybe we can add to this idea some of the terminology we've been using so far. Okay, for this, we could say we've said the word assemblage, we've said found object, we said Merz, right? These are all different types of words people use. Ready-made, to talk about these type of ideas. Sometimes people even say this word bricolage. Okay. Depending on the person, there's different words they use, and they kind of have their own theories, but basically there's a little distinction. Something like a ready-made would be you take it just as it is and you use it. Found object is more about taking objects and then incorporating them and changing them and using them, which is basically what assemblage, bricolage, and Merz are. Those are just particular artist phrases. So just want to kind of set that out there and just kind of let you guys know. And if you read about this type of stuff and study it, you'll hear people use different words, and they're trying to create a nuance, but there's an interconnected idea between them. So this is going to be the end of part 1, and then I'm going to finish off the lecture in part 2, have a few more modern examples for you of work that's from, the last little bit of time, as well as I think a couple older ones that are pretty pertinent. So I hope you guys are engaging with this, thinking about it, and starting the process, the next one we're also going to go over the project sheet a little bit as well to help kind of bring this home a bit. Okay? Take care, guys.